Hi, and thanks for watching my video presentation on task-based learning with iPads. As you can see from the title, I believe that the task-based learning in combination with iPads is a really effective way to engage students with authentic language learning activities. First, I'd like to talk about the conditions for language learning according to Jane Willis. First, language learners must be exposed to language in use. Comprehensible input is key. For false beginners, finding authentic language that is comprehensible is challenging but not impossible. Having an internet-connected iPad in every student's hands makes this a lot easier. Second, learners need to use language to do things. I think things we ask students to do with language must be meaningful, relevant, and interesting if we have any chance of creating the first essential condition, which is motivation. Learners have to want to listen, read, write, and speak. The extrinsic motivation of grades and eventually passing the course is only sufficient to get them into the classroom, in my experience. To actually engage with the language, students need intrinsic motivation. As teachers, we can foster that, partly, by making the tasks we set meaningful, relevant, and interesting. The fourth condition, which Willis defines as desirable but not essential, is instruction. The fact that this condition is not essential in Willis's view manifests in the way instruction typically occurs in task-based learning lessons. I will discuss this further later. With the four conditions in mind, I have composed a simple statement of the goal of task-based learning lessons. To facilitate exposure to comprehensible input, maximize student motivation to use the target language, and provide responsive instruction. What I mean by responsive instruction is that the instruction provided follows the task rather than precedes it, and is given in response to the actual errors of actual students when completing the actual authentic tasks. This is the opposite way we usually teach. I should point out that I'm not advocating only using task-based learning approach. I believe our students are best served by a multifaceted approach drawing from many methods. Prior to this particular lesson, I presented my students with explicit instruction on the grammar points and vocabulary needed to complete this task, as well as opportunities for controlled and freer practice in the communication scenarios which occur. In this way, there was prior overt instruction. However, within a task-based learning lesson itself, the goal is to provide the students with the opportunity to use the language to the best of their ability to complete an authentic communicative task. Overt instruction and correction comes after the students have completed the task and is responsive to their actual errors. I expect many of you have some idea of what task-based learning is. You may have learned about this at some point during your teacher training or professional development. I would like to outline the specific task-based learning framework I used to organize this lesson. I followed the framework laid out by Jane Willis. The framework has three distinct phases: pre-task, the task cycle, and language focus, organized basically in a linear progression. Notice how the language focus comes at the end of the lesson. This is the reverse of how most lessons are organized and connects to the idea that instruction is desirable but not essential in language learning. Because it occurs at the end of the lesson, instruction can be responsive to the student's actual needs. Responsive instruction is more relevant, personalized, and meaningful for the students. Students are more likely to pay attention to errors they may have actually made themselves in an authentic task rather than errors they make in inauthentic tasks, which is actually the way we usually teach. Teach the target language first, then ask the students to complete some decontextualized activity which is designed to help them pass a test. Now I'd like to situate the various activities in the lesson within the task-based learning framework I outlined. Of course, a language learner doesn't need to know or notice the difference between a pre-task activity and a report activity, but as you learn from this lesson, it's important to keep this framework in mind. I began with the pre-task phase by modeling the eventual output that I expect from the students with an audio recording and a presentation. I provided some controlled practice via Pages, and the students completed some research using Wikipedia. Within the task cycle, the students interviewed each other and recorded the audio using the SoundNote app. Then they planned their report by transcribing their interview and preparing a keynote presentation. Finally, they gave their presentation using Keynote, and if they were participating as an observer, they took notes on each other's presentations. Finally, for the language focus section, I gave the students a quiz using Socrative, which I made on the fly, that demonstrated their active listening skills, and I analyzed and corrected errors that I noticed the students making during the task cycle phase. Now, to look at each one of these activities within the lens of the SAMR framework. Basically, SAMR is a taxonomy of the degree of task redefinition that technology allows in the classroom. It's arranged in a hierarchy from substitution, where technology acts as a direct substitute, to redefinition, where technology allows for previously inconceivable tasks. At the various stages in this lesson, the iPad was used at every stage in the SAMR framework. I used the iPad as a substitute for a tape recorder when recording the fictional interview that I used as my model. Pages substituted directly for a pen and paper activity. The use of Keynote, both in the pre-task phase and the report stage, represents augmentation. Keynote allows for interesting graphics and transitions to be added, but otherwise the same information could be presented on paper in a poster. The use of the Wikipedia app for the reading portion of the pre-task phase represents task modification. Previously, students would have been presented with 1, 2, or 3 sets of personal information determined by either textbook authors or their instructor. However, by using the Wikipedia app, students had the freedom to choose from a huge number of different famous people to research. Finally, the use of SoundNote is transformative as it redefines a previous task. Without an iPad, oral interview activities are necessarily ephemeral. The teacher can circulate and listen to individual pairs one at a time, but you know how teacher proximity significantly changes student behavior. The iPad allows for student oral production to become permanent and even to be immediately recycled into a listening task. Moreover, the students are able to share the recording of their interview with the instructor, who is able to use it during the language focus of the lesson. This redefinition substantially increases the instructional value of oral activities in the EFL classroom. Socrative is also transformative in this lesson, as it allows the teacher to create an interactive quiz on the fly. As I was listening to the presentations, I was creating questions for the interactive quiz. This changes a typically passive students barely listening to their classmates' presentation into active students listening because they know there will be a quiz following the presentation. The quiz also produces a lot of instant feedback for the teachers, providing information on who is clearly strong in listening and who might need some more help. Well, thank you very much for your listening to my presentation today. You can follow up with some additional materials I'll provide to see the actual student products and the worksheets I used in the classroom. Thanks very much.